Chapter 11. The Big Boss. Section 1. The briefcase in the aircraft proved to be quite innocent. As Arthur was telling the hostess about it, a passenger overheard him and said that it was his, and that he must have left it in the lavatory by mistake. The rest of the flight turned out to be quite uneventful. Arthur's companion left the plane at Athens, and Arthur slept for most of the second leg of the flight to Bahrain. When he arrived, he checked into his hotel and found a message asking him if he would meet a Mr. Abdul Hakim in the hotel lounge at 6 o'clock that evening. When Arthur met him, he turned out to be the general manager of the Gulf States Banking Corporation. This was not, in fact, the bank that had made the original inquiry. He told Arthur that he had been shown the literature concerning Robinson Electronics computers by the manager of the other bank, who happened to be his cousin, and had been so impressed that he was determined to be the first on the list for one of the new computers. To cut a long story short, the final outcome was that Arthur managed to sell not one, but 4 computers. When he arrived back in London, the news of Arthur's success had already reached the ears of Sir John Robinson, the chairman and managing director and son of the founder of the firm. The day after Arthur's return, he was told to report to Sir John's office. Arthur was rather nervous, as Sir John had the reputation of being an extremely crusty character who didn't suffer fools gladly. But when he reached Sir John's office, he found him extremely affable. He offered Arthur a drink, and then congratulated him on the success of his mission to the Gulf, and questioned him very closely on the details of the negotiations. After a short conversation, he invited Arthur out of the blue to come and have dinner at his home the following Friday, and to bring Mary along.
Are you sure Simon will be all right with Judy?
Of course he will. She is a mother herself, you know. Anyway, he's had his bottle, and you could see he was sound asleep. He'll be as good as gold, I bet.
Yes, I expect so. Anyway, we shouldn't be back too late. I've been told that Sir John does tend to pack up a bit on the early side, if anything. You know, he's always first in the morning and has been known to be at his desk as early as 7 o'clock.
My goodness. He sounds rather formidable. I hope we're not going to be the only ones there.
No, we won't be alone. I don't know exactly how many people there'll be, but I do know that David Masterson's coming along with his better half.
Oh, is he married then? I always got the impression that he was a bachelor.
Oh, no, he's been... I think we turn left here. I'll just stop and look at the map. Well, that's it. Left here, and it's half a mile up on the right.
It's lovely country round here, isn't it? Oh, and look at that lovely house. Isn't it fantastic?
Well, that's where we're going. We're here.
Do I look all right, Arthur?
Yes, you look fine.
Shut up, Cedric! Sit! Sit! Do you hear me? Oh, hello, Arthur.
Good evening, Sir John.
Hello.
You come in. Oh, Cedric, down! Yeah, don't worry about Cedric. He's quite harmless. Well, do come through. This way.
Thank you.
So, on the whole, I think the prospects in the Gulf look pretty bright. Wouldn't you agree, David?
Well, it's early days yet, Sir John. But on the face of it, we seem to have a foot in. What do you think, Arthur?
Well, I'm only the new boy, and it's the first time I've negotiated at that level. But my gut reaction is that the prospects do seem pretty rosy on the whole. One thing's quite certain, anyway.
And John was saying only yesterday that he's tremendously excited about the thing your husband's managed to do. Between you, me, and the gatepost, my dear, I think Arthur might be going places from now on.
Do you really think so? That's nice to hear.
Section 2. This passage is taken from the book Bring on the Empty Horses by the actor David Niven.
He displayed the toughness of stainless steel in business, and the fields were littered with the vanquished. Ronald Coleman, after years under contract to him, refused ever to speak to him again, and Eddie Cantor swore that working for Goldwyn put him in hospital. In Goldwyn's office, the rows with his top director, William Wyler, were so noisy that Merritt Hulbert, the distinguished head of Goldwyn's story department, asked to have his office moved to another floor. "Quiet story conferences make quiet pictures," retorted Goldwyn firmly. But eventually he and Wyler arranged a truce. "Look, Willie," he said, "from now on when we meet, we each put $100 bill on my desk, and the first one to shout loses the money." "Okay," said Wyler. As a result, Hulbert stayed in his office, while next door appalling insults were traded in whispers. I don't believe that Sam was rude on purpose. I think his thoughts flashed through his head with lightning speed, and sometimes he just didn't give his tongue enough time to check its possible effect on people. Once he shook the normally imperturbable Laurence Olivier by being too quick on the verbal draw. Goldwyn came on the set on the second day of shooting, having just seen the rushes of the first day's work on Wuthering Heights. We all stood nervously around, waiting for the great man's comments. He put his arm around Olivier's shoulders, and Larry prepared himself for the compliments which he thought must surely be coming his way. "Willie," said Goldwyn to Wyler, who was hovering nearby, "would you look at that actor's ugly face?" Olivier told me that he objected chiefly to being called that actor. Goldwyn had immense presence and great dignity. His walk was athletic and always brisk. He lifted his heel at each stride. His head had been almost completely bald from an early age, and his eyes were dark, small, and deep-set. His jaw was pronounced and very determined indeed. Employees from top to bottom at his studio were in awe of him for a very good reason. There was not a technical job on the lot that he could not fill perfectly himself. He was well aware of his awesome presence and seldom visited the sound stages, because he knew that his appearance there sowed instant alarm and a feeling of impending doom in the breasts of one and all.
Oral Practice 1. Practice saying these sentences from the dialogue.
There. The only ones there. Going to be the only ones there. We are not going to be the only ones there. I hope we are not going to be the only ones there. A bachelor. He was a bachelor. The impression that he was a bachelor. I always got the impression that he was a bachelor. Isn't it? Round here, isn't it? It's lovely country round here, isn't it?
We're going. Where we're going. Well, that's where we're going.
From now on. Going places from now on. Arthur might be going places from now on. I think Arthur might be going places from now on.
Oral practice 2. Listen to the dialogue and then take the part of B.
I wonder what it's like to be the big boss.
Pretty good, I should think. I'd love to be able to tell everybody what to do and when to do it.
Don't you think you'd have to work jolly hard, though?
Not really. I'm sure the firm would carry on just the same if he weren't there.
No, but he even takes his secretary with him when he goes off in his car, and spends his time dictating letters instead of sitting back and enjoying the ride.
Ha! That's just to impress people, like having a phone in the car.
But he's sometimes at meetings until 11 or 12 at night.
That's just to escape from his wife. I expect they spend most of the time eating and drinking.
Do you really think so?
Well, whatever he does, he doesn't produce anything or sell anything.
What does he do, then?
I expect he spends his time working out how much money he's made and how much he's going to make. Now, wind the tape back to the beginning of this dialogue, and this time speak at the same time as B. Now, here's the dialogue again, and this time you take the part of B.
I wonder what it's like to be the big boss. Don't you think you'd have to work jolly hard, though? No, but he even takes his secretary with him when he goes off in his car, and spends his time dictating letters instead of sitting back and enjoying the ride. But he's sometimes at meetings until 11 or 12 at night. Do you really think so? What does he do, then?
Oral practice 3. Listen to the passage, which is about bosses in the past, and then answer the questions in your book. Young people today often have no idea of some of the things their fathers and their grandfathers had to put up with, especially in their relationship with their bosses. I personally never cease to be fascinated by listening to old people reminiscing about what their bosses made them do when they were younger. I was talking to an old man the other day who was telling me about his boss 45 years ago when he started work in the office of a firm in a small town in the west of England. He was telling me that his boss used to tell him off if he didn't see him in church on a Sunday morning. But what amused me most was when he told the story about the way the boss used to inspect all his clerks to see if they were dressed smartly enough for his liking. He used to walk into the office for no other reason than to look at all his clerks' shoes to see if they were properly polished. He would make each man lift up his feet so that he could see whether the shoes had been polished underneath, on the part between the sole and the heel. If anybody had neglected to do this, he would ask him to report to him the following day. He would then deliver a lecture to the blushing offender in front of the whole office, the essence of which was that a man who was slack in matters of his own personal appearance was bound to be the kind of person who would also be careless with his work. It didn't matter that the man had never been known to make a mistake in his life. As far as I can gather, matters of dress seemed to be a national obsession at that time. Sir John Reith, the Director-General of the BBC, used to insist that radio announcers wore evening dress after 6 o'clock in the evening, although, of course, they were sitting in a studio quite unobserved by the public. My own father, who was a very minor civil servant, used to have to wear a black bowler hat, dark suit, and black shoes to the office every day, and, of course, a stiff white collar. At that time, he also had to work on a Saturday morning, when a certain relaxation was allowed. He then would go off to the office in a soft grey hat, sports jacket, and grey flannel trousers. Oral practice 4. The first speaker seems to be exaggerating. You are more optimistic. Listen to the examples first.
I expect it'll cost about £1,000.
No, it shouldn't cost as much as that.
No, it shouldn't cost as much as that.
I reckon the journey will take 3 hours.
No, it shouldn't take as long as that.
No, it shouldn't take as long as that. Now you do the same.
I expect it'll cost about £1,000.
No, it shouldn't cost as much as that.
I reckon the journey will take 3 hours.
No, it shouldn't take as long as that.
I bet it needs 10 coats of paint on that door.
No, it shouldn't need as many as that.
I don't suppose he'll be here until midnight.
No, he shouldn't be as late as that.
I expect it's -3 degrees in Scotland.
No, it shouldn't be as cold as that.
I bet the film sends us to sleep.
No, it shouldn't be as boring as that.
I reckon my house will need redecorating in 6 months' time.
No, it shouldn't need redecorating as soon as that.
I bet his house is 10 miles from here.
No, it shouldn't be as far as that. That's the end of oral practice 4. Oral practice 5. Vocabulary. Listen to the examples first. Do you know Jack smokes 60 cigarettes a day?
I am surprised. I always thought he was a non-smoker.
I am surprised. I always thought he was a non-smoker.
And he's got a lovely wife.
I am surprised. I always thought he was a bachelor.
I am surprised. I always thought he was a bachelor.
Now you go on in the same way. Do you know Jack smokes 60 cigarettes a day?
I am surprised. I always thought he was a non-smoker.
And he's got a lovely wife.
I am surprised. I always thought he was a bachelor.
And he drinks like a fish.
I am surprised. I always thought he was a teetotaler.
But he goes to church every day.
I am surprised. I always thought he was an atheist.
He doesn't get up until 11 o'clock.
I am surprised. I always thought he was an early riser.
I've seen him write with his right hand.
I am surprised. I always thought he was a left-hander.
And he really enjoyed the meat at lunch.
I am surprised. I always thought he was a vegetarian.
He believes strongly in the capitalist system.
I am surprised. I always thought he was a socialist.
That's the end of Oral Practice 5. Oral Practice 6. You're surprised by the information the first speaker gives you. Listen to the examples.
Mr. Smith's a dentist.
Oh, I didn't know he was a dentist.
Oh, I didn't know he was a dentist.
He drives a Rolls-Royce.
Oh, I didn't know he drove a Rolls-Royce.
Oh, I didn't know he drove a Rolls-Royce.
Now you do the same.
Mr. Smith's a dentist.
Oh, I didn't know he was a dentist.
He drives a Rolls-Royce.
Oh, I didn't know he drove a Rolls-Royce.
His brother teaches English.
Oh, I didn't know he taught English.
And his wife writes novels.
Oh, I didn't know she wrote novels.
Her brother sells cars.
Oh, I didn't know he sold cars.
Well, they all go to church.
Oh, I didn't know they went to church.
And they sing in the choir.
Oh, I didn't know they sang in the choir.
And I never speak to them.
Oh, I didn't know you never spoke to them.
That's the end of Oral Practice 6. Oral Practice 7. Dictation. First, cover up the passage and listen, please. There were once 2 rival company bosses, who, although distantly polite whenever they met, hated each other. As soon as it was possible to have telephones installed in cars, the first boss had one put in, and boasted about his new status symbol. The second boss was determined to get even, and he too acquired a phone in his car. The first day he had it, he rang up the first boss's car to tell him that he too had a car phone. The first boss answered, and then said, "Excuse me, but I'm wanted on the other phone." Now you'll hear the passage again, and this time you must write down what you hear. There were once 2 rival company bosses, who, although distantly polite, whenever they met, hated each other. As soon as it was possible to have telephones installed in cars, the first boss had one put in, and boasted about his new status symbol. The second boss was determined to get even, and he too acquired a phone in his car. The first day he had it, he rang up the first boss's car to tell him that he too had a car phone. The first boss answered, and then said, "Excuse me, but I'm wanted on the other phone." Now, here's the passage again. There were once two rival company bosses who, although distantly polite whenever they met, hated each other. As soon as it was possible to have telephones installed in cars, the first boss had one put in and boasted about his new status symbol. The second boss was determined to get even, and he too acquired a phone in his car. The first day he had it, he rang up the first boss's car to tell him that he too had a car phone. The first boss answered and then said, "Excuse me, but I'm wanted on the other phone." Now, check the dictation in your book. That's the end of Chapter 11.